All right. Layer's law number two is related to the first, but distinct in a couple of ways. The main point of Layer's law number two is that your headline should be a spoiler. So it should provide an overview of everything that is going to come in a particular part of a paper or a particular section, and there shouldn't be any surprises for the reader. That's the main thing. All right. You're going to give away the ending, which is usually the conclusion or the significance of something, and you want to give that away right at the beginning, right in your headline. So your headline should outline who the main actors are in a particular section. So if you're talking about Marx and Smith, make sure to mention them. How they're related, they're on opposite sides of the liberal dream and commodified nightmare debate, and what their significance or consequence is. Smith representing the liberal dream camp and thinking that the origins of capitalism are good. Marx representing the commodified nightmare camp, thinking the origins of capitalism were bad. And so another way of putting this, your headline should offer a roadmap of what your paper is about, so it's topic, where it's going. All right, that's part of your spoiler because you're saying, here's where we're going to end up. And then who's going to come along the way. So if your section, you're writing on Marx's origins of the theory of capitalism, right? And you're going to talk about how peasants were stripped of their land and bloody legislation and slavery. In the headline for that section, you should say you're going to talk about those three things, so it's not a surprise. So the reader isn't, you start off writing about how peasants were kicked off their land, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, now you're talking about bloody legislation. They should have a sense that that's coming down the road. And in terms of being a spoiler, they should have a sense that Marx, say, thinks the origins of capitalism were bad. The fact that these things are bad from his point of view, that's the spoiler, because now you have a sense of where the paper is going, or at least that section is going. In my experience, students tend to write what I call detective stories, which are things you have to read all the way to the very end to make sense of what being said. Which is another way of saying they put their headline with the spoiler aspect of it at the end of a section. And the example I give here is Rosebud. And if you know the significance of this term, you might be familiar that it comes out of a movie called Citizen Kane. I won't spoil anything for you, but Citizen Kane is an older movie. Some argue is the best movie that's ever made. The opening scene, there's a man on his deathbed, and he keeps muttering the word Rosebud. Then, the rest of the movie, you have no idea what Rosebud is or its significance until the ending scene, in which it's revealed what Rosebud is. And again, I won't spoil it for you if you ever want to watch the movie. All right? But what this means is, as a viewer, you can't appreciate the significance of Rosebud and why he is saying that on his deathbed until the very end of a movie. Now, detective stories are great for movies. Detective stories are great for things like, books that you read on the beach. And for academic works, they are terrible. All right? You want to spoil the ending. You want to give away who done it first, and then explain how and why this person did it. All right? If some academic books are really big, 500 pages, you can't keep someone in anticipation for regarding why they should read about this particular book and what conclusion you're going to for 400 or 500 or 600 pages, because you're just not going to keep someone's interest. Rather, you want to start with your spoiler, all right? I'm talking about this thing, and this thing's consequential because it's really good or it's really bad. Start with that, then walk through your arguments and show how and why you come to this conclusion. So start with a headline. Make sure your headline is a spoiler. And again, the point is, you want to be able to anticipate or give the reader enough information so they can appreciate what you're saying as you're saying it, or setting up why they should anticipate, setting up why they should appreciate something, as opposed to making a read it first, then give them its significance at the end of 100 pages or 200 pages, and then make them think back, and then make them, after the fact, realize or appreciate something. If you're doing that, you're making the reader work unnecessarily, and therefore you're not doing your job as a writer. So, in papers, when I see detective stories, they often take the structure, or a structure similar to this. Here's a concept. Here's evidence. These are some things that happened. And at the end, oh, guess what? Concept X explains this evidence that we see. So here, this thesis, or conclusion, is actually it's this thesis. This conclusion spoils the ending. We know that X explains these things. But its thesis should actually come on top, because this is a detective story. When a paper is structured this way, here's this thing. The reader can think, okay, why are you talking about this thing? Here's some evidence. Okay, here's some evidence. Why do I care? When you finally get down here, now I understand why I should care. What you want to do is you want to explain to the reader how and why they should care right from the start. That way they can appreciate what you're saying, and they're much more likely to follow along with you. So a good structure, one where there's a spoiler, one there's a roadmap. You start with your thesis. X explains these things. Then you want to explain and show how and why. X does explain these things. And in your conclusion is a restatement of your thesis. We have seen how A, B, and C are explained by X. I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. When you're writing your paper, it's probably going to look like this. You know you need to talk about a certain concept. There are certain things that you think are important to talk about, but you're not really sure why, but you know they are important. And it's funny when you're done after a page or two and you've written this stuff out that everything kind of clicks. And it's like, this makes sense. This is why I'm talking about these things. This is why these things are significant in light of this concept. And you'll come to this conclusion after you've written about it. So it's going to come, if you think about the actual layout of paper, it's going to come at the very bottom. That's completely fine. It's natural. You're going to learn as you write. You're only going to get in trouble is if you stop here. If you stop here, you leave your paper as a detective story. If what you do then is go the next step, you realize your conclusion is now your thesis. You move it back up here. So instead of just starting with this concept, you start with your thesis that X explains A, B, and C. Then you start explaining A, B, and C in light of this concept X and showing why X explained these things. And then you can come back and you can then restate your thesis. So you're going to probably learn initially like a detective story, because as you're writing, you're learning. That's fine. You just need to go the next step and then move your conclusion, make it your thesis, and then explain everything in light of your thesis. All right, and again, the main thing to note with this idea that your thesis, that your headline should be a spoiler, is that it's more than stating the topic of your paper. People often state the topic and then assume that explains everything else. But a topic just lets the reader know what the paper is about, not who the main players are, where it's going, what's its significance, who cares, and how these things tie together. So, an example of a bad spoiler would just be a statement of a topic. In this paper, I'm going to talk about Marxist theory or idea of exploitation. That's a statement of its topic, but that's not a condensed version of your argument. It's not a spoiler. The reader has no sense of why you're talking about exploitation. Is exploitation good or bad? Is it good for some people, bad for other people? Is it something I need to worry about? Is it something I don't need to worry about? The reader doesn't know. You need to give the reader all that information so they can appreciate what you're going to be saying. So an example of a good spoiler in the same context. In this paper, I'm going to talk about Marx's idea of exploitation in the context of a capitalist economy, and show how and why he thinks capitalism is an inherently exploitative economic system. All right, so now I know I'm talking about capitalism. I know I'm talking about exploitation. And Marx thinks that capitalism is inherently exploitative. So if there's capitalism, there's going to be exploitation. I understand that link. Then I go on. As will be seen, Marx is concerned about exploitation because he thinks it results in the destitution of workers and creates an ever-widening gulf between workers and owners. So if there's capitalism, I'm going to see exploitation. And at least from Marx's point of view, if there's capitalism, there's exploitation, and exploitation is bad for these reasons. This is a good spoiler because I'm talking about the main actors involved in this argument, and then I'm showing the reader where the argument's going and why he or she should care about it.